Tohno Shiki murders Satsuki Yumizuka in the Maid routes. Now, you might be saying to yourself, didn't he also kill her in the Akiha route? And while the answer from the looking glass might read as yes, it's more up to say Shiki saved Satsuki in the Akiha route. In that story, he feels instant remorse, and her words cling to him like sap to a tree. He takes on her sentimentality and makes it a part of himself. This event, more than any other in Tsukihime, puts the fragility of human life, specifically those he holds dear, into perspective. With how far gone sweet Sacchin was, there wasn't an alternative, obviously. And though Shiki realizes that, he couldn't just ignore those emotions Satsuki so brilliantly displayed on that sun-soaked street. And in her last words, in which she thanked him and hearkened back to that day they innocently shared. More than any other thing in the story, this makes Tohno Shiki cherish life. In the Maid routes, however, there's nothing of the sort. No redemption for Satsuki, no feelings of remorse for Shiki. He comes away from killing her on the verge of climax, and afraid of how utterly blissful it all felt. He has no sentiment of attachment towards her. She just proved that he could kill those closest to him, and that he liked it, causing Shiki to retract inward and think about how he could do it. Satsuki's murder isn't just some one-off thing that he can write off as a dream. While she was indeed a vampire, it doesn't change the fact that Shiki killed someone he knew and cared for. He went out to save her, but only ended up killing her coldly and without hesitation. Satsuki's words of, "You're just like me," spoken in the blood-stained, lemon organ-riddled back alley, don't cling to him. They become an intrinsic part of who Tohno Shiki is. In this way, the development of Satsuki determines Shiki's fate. In this way, the Maid routes immediately take a different turn than anything prior. In this way, the far side of the moon dawns over the sky, flooding Tsukihime with the veil of insularness. Rewind the clock back a bit to the sunset of the first day, Shiki walking up the hill thinking about returning to the Tohno mansion. How things feel off about his sister and, most important, about a promise he made before he left. Reaching into his bag and grasping the delicate white ribbon which had been gifted to him with the promise of returning it one day. It's a simple thing, and as a short-haired lad, it shouldn't have any value to him. Yet, of the single suitcase Shiki brought with him to the Tohno mansion, this was the most important thing. He wants to return the hope that promise gave him back to its sender, to let her know that those words saved him. It's just a simple little promise. He doesn't even know if the girl who gave it to him remembers it. It's been 8 years, really, only he'd to get caught up in such nonsense from back then. The audience certainly has been inside Shiki's head for the majority of the story up to this point, yet they haven't really gotten to know him, have they? It's clear he has some messed up stuff going on in his mind, and he's reached some lows in prior routes for sure. Even so, he hasn't been bottomed out. The Hisui route breaks Tohno Shiki into little pieces. If you've heard anything about Tsukihime, it was probably that Shiki loses his mind in this little crevice of the story, and how it's Nasu's writing at his best. This is a vast oversimplification, and for the second point, I'd argue just wrong. Shiki doesn't spend the entire route bedridden, just trapped in his mind. It only lasts a few days, and at most is a feature on the back of the box, not the main selling point. See, post-Yumizuka, Shiki doesn't immediately go and break down. He bottles it up, and tries to live life like nothing happened. Repression. What a funny thing it is. It's a feat which he manages for a decent while, though. Take a step outside of Shiki and to look at him from someone else's point of view. He's someone you can grow to depend on without even realizing it. Beyond his family who grew up with him, people with no affiliation like Satsuki believed that he was the type of person to save her in a pinch. A descriptor you don't necessarily apply to anyone you meet. Conversely, however, due to that nature of his, it's hard to notice what thoughts he might be having. Even if you were to suspect something, you'd be hard-pressed to get him to tell you. His upbringing in a place that doesn't feel like home has made him a blockhead when it comes to relying on other people. If it's something he can do himself, he will. At the risk of being injured, traumatized, or even dying, he will. He feels like he owes it to the people around him who have given him so much. He's the selfless type, to an absolute fault. Now, let's describe Shiki. He wants to help people, and there's nothing wrong with that in theory, but at the end of the day, the way he is willing to sideline other people to achieve that goal does make him selfish, a selfish, selfless person. He constantly causes worry for his sister due to his actions. Poor sweet Akiha. What will she do with such a problematic brother? A sibling who also has murderous impulses that he's acted on. A relative who plainly admits his attraction for his sister at multiple points and an increasing reverence. Someone who has dreams about stalking the nightly streets in search of someone who looks just like her. Contradiction, given life, inversion impulse, or just impulse. Shiki, whom in this route gets locked up in a room for an inconceivable amount of time, fearing what he might do to his dear loved ones should he get out. A guy so unwilling to receive aid for fear of putting the other at a disadvantage that he doesn't see that by causing them to worry so much about him, he's making them worse off. Irrational, teeth of veins, destroy, violate, ravage, fuck, ruin, murder, inseminate, desecrate. Yes, Tohno, Shiki, who by the end of the story needs the help of a synchronizer to even function properly, yet takes more pleasure in the act than needed. A violent person who fantasizes about sweet, sticky incest, and lashes out with the same acts he envisions, flooding the insides of some poor, unsuspecting maid with all of his burdensome desire. Someone who no matter what, won't get out of my head. Now, let's describe Shiki. An individual who is very meticulous. He has a set process of doing things, and though it might seem a tad bullheaded, he'll do what it takes to achieve what's needed. The urges he feels infect him like a virus, but he pushes them down, lest they creep up and become him. Shiki is a perfectly capable human, a good host for those around him. His bloodline, though not actually Tohno, was still well respected for their abilities. The urges he feels towards Kohaku, Hisui, and of course Akiha are admittedly damning, but it's all part of the process. Why would you not take pleasure while you have it readily available to you, especially if it helps soothe your battered mind? Just pour the burden into someone else so you can pursue your long-standing goals. The connection is deeper now. So it's only natural that he feels like that. If something happens down the line, it isn't Shiki's fault. It simply couldn't be helped. That's just the way things go. Plus, looking through the world with these eyes will make it all a cinch. Shiki really can't do anything with just a little push. Just a little more and he'll leap out of this bed, release the demon he keeps just underfoot, and I will take over. There's no running from the facts. There's no hiding all those grotesque ideas floating about your skull. It evades the realm of logic to say that those thoughts which constantly flare up are fleeting. No, in reality, it's just like Satsuki said. You're just like her. A killer. Now, let's describe Shiki. For the majority of the Hisui route, he's hitting his head against the wall trying to get her to remember the promise. The ribbon in his bag, as he starts slipping into himself, becomes his lifeline. It was the only thing he came back to the mansion for, and at each occurrence the past is brought up and immediately dodged by Hisui, he descends the spiral a bit more, which in turn only makes him want to fulfill the promise more. Much like Shiki himself, the object of the ribbon is contradictory. It both heals him when he's down in the mental pit, while conversely pushing him deeper into the muck when those feelings aren't requited by the one who gifted them to him. He's more than a little off. I mean, more than usual in Tsukihime. During this route, we've seen him given to those impulses before, but that really was just a taste for this particular subsect of the visual novel. Hisui doesn't remember the promise, and when he talks to Kohaku about it, Even she's surprised that Hisui wouldn't remember such an important thing. It nags at the back of his mind, but as nothing can be done if only one person remembers, Shiki just becomes stuck, stagnant. Things such as the welcoming party certainly do help him resume course, but more than anything, what calms Shiki's worried mind is, and again with the contradictions, sweet, sweet Hisui. She brings him comfort and medicine that Kohaku made, so I suppose it's more apt to say that both of them work in tandem to bring him peace. Having maids must be so nice. Though the medication is needed, it's seeing Hisui smile that really gets him going again. So much so that as he starts to have fun in the mansion and really gets to know the three he grows to call family, he forgets all about scary things like Yumizuka and can finally, slowly, drift off to sleep. My existence is such a pleasant one. The streets I prowl provide me with fun. I start with a cut, pull out the guts, and feel so good I could come. This is normal, this is normal, this is normal, this is what I've always done. How could it be wrong? This is normal, this is normal, and this is normal. Then why do I feel so off? What could be the cause? I pick my brain with long, untrimmed nails and forcibly shred out half my sanity. Get out of my head. Oh, but his dreams don't let him do anything of the sort. He can't run from his sins, and it's thusly that more acts of rape and of violence that he takes pleasure in flood his mind at night. He's thankful for the sleep. The boy needs his rest, but every time those eyes of his close, they open into a world where everything is inverted. He takes joy in things that feel antithetical to who Tohno Shiki is at his core, and that causes him to slip. Who is Tohno Shiki? He doesn't want to be that thing. He wants to be the person he was before. He wants to escape this spiraling contradiction. When he wakes up, when he finally opens his eyes and light fills his hazy vision, Hisui is always there to reaffirm his existence. He's a stone-headed fool when it comes to letting other people in, but it's not inaccurate to say that when he sees Hisui every morning, it saves him from those maddening dreams, causing Hisui to become precious to him, saving him over and over again like she did in their youth. She may not remember the promise from all that time ago, yet she's still the same Hisui from back then. It's a really beautiful thing seeing Shiki's adoration for her presence bloom into love. Shiki asks her to cook for him one time. It's a big cliche, but I can attest to its validity personally. It's one of the biggest signs of gratitude to enjoy someone else's cooking or to make something for someone. Food is the one thing all humans can bond over. I think it's sweet that Shiki wants to express that, which only compounds into Hisui's cute, flustered reaction. Her sister is the one who can cook, so she's worried Shiki will hate it. This scene, though it does eventually have comedic payoff in Kagetsu Toya, in Tsukihime proper, it's emblematic of the dynamic these two have. They're the most innocent pair in the house by a wide margin. Simple things like seeing her smile gives Shiki emotions so charming that calling them butterflies wouldn't be the half of it. He believes with all his heart that she looks natural with a smile, and makes it his mission to make her do so as much as possible. Nonetheless, to Shiki, Hisui goes from a girl he remembers fondly to a distant but not stone-faced maid to someone he unequivocally loves. So much so that he starts to have less than innocent thoughts about her. You know, the typical teenager perversions of raping her in a decrepit classroom in the dead of night, her blank expression etched into his skull. Something completely normal. This kind of stuff makes his heart all aflutter when he sees her. It picks up pace and he needs to run away. He has to make sure he's not harming anyone. We saw on the Ciel route what happens when Shiki lets his compulsion get the better of him. It's not pretty. Those thoughts, they keep flaring up in the daytime, and when he sleeps, he's tormented by dreams of being the local vampire. But those are just dreams and intrusive thoughts. There's no way it could be him. He's never had the itch to actually go out and kill something like that, let alone scratch. Satsuki Yumizuka. He felt everything he feels in those dreams the moment his knife slid through her lines. Shiki is a killer. He got off on it even. If he's having those instincts flare up when he sees Hisui, Kohaku, or his sister, then there must be some grain of truth to what Sacchin said, body covered in the blood of her food. You're just like me. All this, and Shiki stays perfectly sane. He feels those desires building up, till they're about to burst. Before he dashes up to his room, locking the door so no one will be hurt by him. Those compulsions, they sicken him. They make him feel inhuman. He can't escape them. So they must be reality. He feels sick. At night, he sees dreams of stalking about the city streets for new victims that turn out to be reality the next morning. During the day, he feels those same urges towards his dear loved ones. He feels sick. Like he'll throw up any second. School is out of the question. He can't run away from himself if he's in a building full of people. People. Other people make him feel this way, ergo, it's better to cut them out. He feels sick. While isolated, Shiki gets thirsty. Shiki drinks blood to quench his thirst. It feels good. It feels orgasmic. Shiki drinks water. It does nothing to burn in his throat. Shiki acts upon his desires and is able to maintain a sliver of sanity through it. Shiki is locked in the room. Shiki is locked in the room. Shiki feels sick. Shiki feels sick. Shiki feels sick. So he needs to take his medicine. Thankfully, the one person he can rely on in this godforsaken house is always there to help him. Down the medicine goes, and our humble little protagonist can finally get his rest. Thank God for making the medicine and Hisui delivering it. Scratch until there is no more skin. Stab, so he doesn't get in. My head is not a looking glass. Remove that which is familiar shall be cut. You don't belong here. Isolation compounded by a gaze. Watch this horror and sink with the days. This is not only normal, this is you at your core. Stop hiding, stop watching. You are not me. Get out of my head. 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 Of course, sleep means seeing those dreams again. Hisui standing at the doorway would normally comfort him, but right now he feels that black mud chugging through his veins, reaching his head, compelling him to let her in. Let her in and have a little fun, Shiki. Give into it. It'll make you feel better, so it only makes sense. It's simple. It's easy. It'll be fun to do. Don't keep her waiting. Be a good host, Shiki. Slamming his head against the back of the wall allots him a brief amount of sanity to tell Hisui or whoever's at the door to go away. He'll be fine on his own. This is something he has to do. If he so much as harms anyone close to him, he'd feel better off dead. This is what it means to be inside the mind of Tohno Shiki during the Hisui route. This is why it is vast oversimplification to say Shiki goes insane, because simply stating a concept is not the same as actually conveying what those words mean. I criticize Nasu's writings for many things. Of course, I am reading them through the eyes of a translation, so bear that in mind. But his writing can often come across as overly expository and self-aggrandizing at times. You can see the former in a work like Fate's Stay Night, where much of the visual novel is spent sitting in the Emiya household talking about what's for dinner, and in the worst cases, explaining the plot. And you can see the latter in Kara no Kyokai. It got a lot better later on, but Movie 1, ergo Book 1, contains lines like, "What does it mean for humans to fly?" Which, while I am a fan of how it explores that concept, link up top by the way, it is ultimately overcomplicating a simple concept. However, the last two routes of Tsukihime use these exact problems and go places. Good places. See, though these two problems don't gel well with the overarching story of K&K or FSN, they gel amazingly with Tsuki, for a few reasons. I'm a strong, adamant defender in having the Maid routes read last. Having the basic knowledge of Nanaya Shiki from the Akiha and Arcwade routes and how Roa can affect the mind from the Ciel route are certainly needed as a baseline for what goes on here. We, as the audience, aren't left in a total dark, cryptic mess. We understand the basic concepts, and with that in tow, the route can show us Shiki's mind rent itself apart with these outside forces violating it. You learn that Akiha, Tohno, and Shiki share the same life force on some basic level in the Akiha route. It's here where we learn the ramifications of that. Shiki has the dreams he had in prior routes about murders, yet where he had reasonable suspicion it wasn't him, here, due to Yumizuka, he can't exactly shrug it off. Reasonably so, I might add. This route makes you question. I didn't do it. I mumbled again and again and again, a half mantra, half anti-confession. I could avoid the voices reaching out, silence the ones from within. I'd rather cast my gaze into the void than try and come to terms with that which was inconsolable. The act, myself, and the spiral. Naturally, it's not him, of course. Even so, when he gets a taste of Hisui's blood and describes it as some of the sweetest stuff he's ever tasted, it creates reasonable belief that he could be doing something. I mean, he has more impulses in this route than any prior. He nearly acts on them so many times. And most damningly, Akiha says she'll kill her Nissan for the sake of preserving the Tohno bloodline. Shiki is, after all, her only Nissan, so he better hide away. Even if you know that Tohno is the blood relative of Akiha, this can still be seen as something to condemn Shiki. Akiha straight up disowned Tohno in her own route after all. To her, he is not family. Shiki has things explained to him in cryptic ways. Stuff doesn't make total sense, and he racks his brain trying to reach an answer, only to find more ways that it could be him. In this route, Shiki is the audience. He asks reasonable questions and, because of the position he's in, doesn't get everything handed to him in a nice little bow. Nasu's writing style plays into every strength it has here. I felt like I had a reasonable idea of what was going on by the time I read the first 3 routes, but halfway through Hisui's, I realized I didn't even know half of it. I was an empty vessel with but a few drops of knowledge waiting to be filled. Hisui's route did that. It filled me up. Questions were flying left and right with breadcrumb trails leading to more answers and questions in each and every scene. It's constantly setup, payoff, and it feels good. Shiki thinks about the 2 girls he knew in the past. Boom, we see them, and already eyebrows are raised with how each is presented. Hisui's a blank slate, but no she's not. She gets more emotional than anyone else. Oh, Hisui is afraid of men touching her? Then what was that lovely little bit of eroge earlier? See, it doesn't necessarily answer things directly, but it drives its claws into a reader's ears and eyeballs, dragging them through thousands of mouse clicks or spacebar presses to find out more. All that in mind, let's take a minute to talk about title cards. Day 8 of the route is known as Death. Conversely, also known as the day shit hits the fan. See, Shiki's been lying around the past few days, not bedridden mind you, it's just that medicine, nor comfort from those around him seem to help, and Shiki's worsening condition has had an ardent effect on his mental state. As he walks out into the courtyard towards the familiar tree line, he recalls a scene that all Tsukihimers know well. The sound of cicadas drown out Akiha's crying as Tohno Shiki looks down at the figure of a bloody child, a memory which he misconstrues as him killing that child. The first death Shiki remembers. As well, the title is about the death of Tohno and Nanaya Shiki as individuals. After this incident, he took the spot of his forlorn brother, making him the fake Tohno Shiki. Not that one, we're not there yet. Another video for another time. Back to the point. In that sense, Shiki has 4 deaths over the course of every route. Once as a child, losing his entire family. Once more at the hands of Tohno, again as those memories are stripped away for him to become the Tohno heir. And lastly, Tsukihime itself is the last death of Shiki, as he comes out the other end of every route a changed person. Hence, death doesn't refer to the act of ceasing to exist, but the act of losing one's sense of self. From here follows the Burning Body trilogy, where Shiki is sapped of sanity by Roa during the day and tormented by Tohno in his dreams. I don't think I need to explain any more about Shiki going insane, but I do want to talk about a certain scene that happens on the last day of the trilogy. Hisui comes in, late at night, and starts chastising Shiki about never noticing what was right in front of him. How she looked down at him from the window when they were kids, how she could never render herself null because he acknowledged her existence by staring back. Following this, a lifeless H scene occurs. The act makes Shiki feel free from being invaded from all sides of his mind. Also, he can move his body again. Maybe I should have mentioned that sooner. In Shiki's mind, Hisui just saved him again. This also plants the idea in the reader's head that sex with Hisui seems to cool his burning body. As he can function again, Shiki heads out to the detached building, just as a thing to do, where another classic scene that all Tsukihimers will know well takes place. Akiha suckling on Kohaku's breast, drinking her blood. Their conversation this time around is a bit more interesting than in the Akiha route. Akiha gets to that little tidbit I mentioned earlier about how she's going to kill her Nissan. As her Nissan, Shiki's life preservation skills kick in and he locks himself in his room. If he stays in there, he can't hurt anybody, and they can't hurt him.
And they can't hurt him. It's a win-win to cut himself off from others.
It's a win-win to cut himself off from others. When I was myself during those peculiar intermittent times, I was terrified of actually going out and interacting with anyone. All through middle school and occasionally later on, I calculated the number of days I could stay home without anyone making a big fuss about it, and used those days as wisely as I could, staying home when the veneer was feeling particularly shoddy. As with all things in life during that time, I had figured that if anyone knew what had happened, they too would be reaching out to catch me. I could already hear their voices thick with scorn and asking, why? I had no answer, so I had to stay home and continue reconstruction. This was the birth of tendencies I would later expand upon right after high school, as I quit everything I was doing and had my first dance with being a hikikomori over the summer. I eventually went to college, but I slept through most of my classes and evaded responsibility. I constantly stayed up during the night by myself, just coping. About what? Fuck if I knew. But I sure was doing a good job of it. I was told so much before I went that college was supposed to change everything, that once I'd arrive I had to meet new people and break out of my shell. A sentiment which is laughable to say the least now. I didn't break out of my shell, I just grew a thicker one that didn't interact with other people but instead scorned them all as idiots. At the time, I really was Emiyashiro, a projection master. I locked myself up in my room and, when not watching anime or coping, looked down from the window at the people having the time of their lives and wished in my heart of hearts that they'd all go to hell. In reality, I just wanted what they did. Conversely, I also figured that what I was going through was normal, and while to a point it was, social ostracization and all that, it also clearly wasn't. I pondered so much how they could get through those barriers so quickly. Was it because they were just idiots who didn't think about it? After all, if they did think, how could they not be as terrified? Or was I just the idiot that didn't get it? Meanwhile, the lock on the door remained firm as I searched up for more ways to escape it. Regardless of how much they knock, he refuses to let them in. When Akiha and Kohaku leave and it's just him and Hisui, he still refuses. She could be in on it after all. What if she comes in and tries to kill him? Worse yet, what if he ends up hurting someone he's come to love? What then? He couldn't do that. He has to stay in this room so that he doesn't do that. Akiha and Kohaku probably left so that Hisui could lure him out. They just said they left. Yeah, that has to be it. The minute the door opens, their plan will be in action and bad things will happen. Shiki doesn't want that, so he has to stay here and let his body wither and die. Hisui refuses to leave. She comes up again and again, trying to get him to open up. It reminds him of something. When he first came to the mansion, scared and confused. When it felt like everyone around him was trying to kill him. He used to hide away in a place that felt familiar. Other people tried to draw him out of that Japanese-style outbuilding, but none ever actually succeeded in doing so. Except for that girl. That girl. Not the one that gave him the ribbon, but the girl who played with him and Akiha. That girl who always smiled so brightly. She was like an older sister to him. She was the first person to get him to come out and stop being afraid of everything. That girl? It was Hisui. All the contradictions and inconsistencies click. Hisui standing there, tears in her eyes, just so happy to see him alive when everyone else has gone off is, frankly, one of the best moments in Tsuki. If anyone could get him to confront reality and get out of his own mental prison, it was her. This is compounded by one of the best CGs in the visual novel. I don't know why Takeuchi has such a penchant for drawing women crying, but holy hell is this good. The color symmetry with her childhood CG, as well as Hisui generally having subdued emotions in her sprite work, make this stick out as the moment things change. It's hopeful in message, artwork, and story placement. It's not too late for things to work out. Before they rush gung-ho into helping out their respective sisters, though, a little tidbit of info is given by Hisui. Just a little sliver of information that I'm sure won't come back to be important in the next route in the slightest. She tells Shiki that she and Kohaku are what are known as synchronizers, a term I've brought up loosely before. Essentially, through the process of having sexual intercourse with a member of the opposite sex, or through drinking the blood of the same sex, they can take away a good deal of the mental or physical burden the other might be facing. Sex with the red-haired girl cools Shiki's burning body and all that neat stuff. Speaking of that scene though, as this explanation happens, one more not-so-subtle bombshell drops. That last H scene wasn't Hisui. That was Kohaku dressed up as her. Not even the first time she did that either. Whenever Shiki was given medicine, that was Kohaku as well. You can tell this by one simple detail. This sprite. She kinda looks like a doll with those eyes, doesn't she?
The
upon both sides of the mind, thoughts seep. Intrusive at first, they now scream in a cacophony of insomniatic whisperings. What could they mean? To accept what I have, I'd have to be mad. The looker from the other side agrees with me. The looker knows what I'm thinking. It is the force that controls. It is the puppeteer trying to untangle a mess of string. An old idea pops into his mind. Cut the strings and then they will be free. Lines are blurred. Once the strings are cut, nothing will be left. No one to hear about the deed that was done. To the puppeteer, this mutual self-destruction was fated. But to the emotionless doll, this thought makes it flicker. Looking back to its master, it nags him, begging to continue. The puppet's once dead irises cry out, but the master who gave it life denies it the right. Once the strings cut and they switch places, one of them will be lost to time. The master unable to part with the apathetic plaything, and the doll to its last bit of humanity when it assumes the form of the master. They will remain one and the same until the day the strings are cut and the doll falls to the floor, expressionless and without hesitation. Tohno Shiki is a good man, though a fragile one. He feels like everything around him could break apart at any second, and though he has his glasses and people around him to ensure that doesn't happen, those things are ultimately temporary, like Shiki himself. He has little in the way of self-worth, feels like a burden to other people, and puts everything onto his own shoulders. He can't do that forever. To him, it might seem like he's doing the bare minimum, but to those who love and care for him, seeing him struggle like that is insomnia-inducing. They can share some of the burden. They want to share some of the burden. When Shiki opens that door, lets Hisui in, and they make love, they both take on each other's load. Though the weight is a bit heavier than before, having two backs to carry it all on makes it feel like nothing. Shiki learned to rely on other people in the other routes, sure, but he was largely the comforter for them and not the other way around. The Hisui route is the first time he lets someone in. He and Hisui are both birds of a feather in that way. So adamant about dealing with things on their own terms that until someone comes along and helps them up, they wouldn't have even noticed they were on the ground struggling. I like this relationship. It's not supplementary, it's complementary. Both have reached a point where they can care for the other and support them, as well as taking care of themselves. In Shiki's case, all he had to do was open the door and receive the help he needed to get back on his feet. In Hisui's, well, Hisui is an interesting case. I've always had an affinity for characters who are doll-like. For instance, Rei is my favorite character in Evangelion, Ilian, Fate's Stay Night, Nadeko Sengoku and Monogatari, and right here in Tsukihime, my favorite character, who has a route, is the girl Shiki gave the ribbon to. As evidenced by the list, it's not necessarily that these characters act like a lifeless doll, more so that they have their actions dictated by an outside force, be it external or internal. Seeing these characters come into their own and reach the conclusion of their respective arcs is always compelling as hell to me. Hisui is an interesting case because she essentially did the process I was referring to earlier in reverse. She became stone-faced because it benefited someone she owes the world to. Or she thought it did. See, Hisui has something akin to survivor's guilt. She feels disgusted that she was the only one who didn't take the brunt of Magisa's upbringing. She got off scot-free while those close to her suffered. Learning about everything after the fact causes her to feel like what happened was for her sake. And make no mistake, it absolutely was, to an extent. But Hisui's reaction to it all is a bit self-centered in my outlook. That's not a critique of her character, mind you. I adore what Nasu has put to paper here. It's a totally natural reaction to finding out that someone close to you was put through hell for your sake. However, her reaction is the sole reason things went worse in the Tohno household. She falls into her complex of needing to remain pure, and though she's still a functional human by all means, she's limiting herself. It's not just a switch she can turn off though. What happened was horrible. One of the worst things that can occur even. But that doesn't mean abandoning the way things used to be full stop is the way to go. You have to take the good with the bad and be true to yourself. If Akiha's main issue is clinging fervently to the past, ignoring all the bad stuff, Hisui's main issue is rejecting the past in spite of all the good that came with it. I love playing these routes back to back for that reason. It offers a nice dichotomy on what nostalgia is. It's looking at everything rosy and looking at everything gray. To most people, there is no in-between. At the beginning of the Far Side routes, Akiha will talk happily about how she and Shiki used to play together. Hisui, by comparison, says something along the lines of, "It was 8 years ago. Forgive me for not remembering." She chooses time and time again to ignore it, until she remembers that there was good in it. Back then, she was a caring person, and when she smiles, glimpses of that person are still seen. As I was talking earlier in this video, I realized that it can come across that Shiki uses Hisui as a crutch of sorts in this route, and from his point of view, he is. However, from an objective standpoint, they both only stand to gain by being around each other. Shiki gains something to wake up for, and Hisui rekindles some of her old radiance. The more they interact, the more she opens up, the less visceral her reaction at a mere touch. The process is a slow one, as all processes towards self-betterment tend to be. Within the confines of this route, we see Hisui toying around with the idea that she could be as she was, that if she were to have a relationship even, that it wouldn't be an inherently bad thing. It's something that would make her happy, and maybe that was all that those around her wanted. Hisui's reaction to the events of the past are a net negative when they directly harm other people. For example, when Shiki first gets so sick that he can barely move, she has to call Kohaku to come and help, because so much as laying a finger on a man means she'll be sullied. It's a self-imposed handicap that everyone in the house recognizes, yet doesn't take any active stance to fix because that would be akin to saying, what happened meant nothing. Well, everyone except Kohaku. 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 When a part didn't fit, I spent a period of time reflecting before moving on to the next. If this one didn't work, I'd try this one. I couldn't tell you how many times I had that thought process growing up. Typically, these parts I assigned to myself would crack or break at the slightest inconvenience, but I'd always ascribe myself a replacement by the time next week rolled around. To tell the truth, it was little more than roleplay. Being a quiet and isolationist-leaning kid, I wasn't sure how to express those thoughts of mine outwardly, especially when I myself wasn't convinced of the build quality. It was simple stuff. This month I'll get really into martial arts. The next I'll actually talk to people. Though a lot of it was fun for a time, I always recognized it as something I did to avoid thinking. Eventually, it reached a point where I tried my damnedest to find anything I could be passionate about. And if it turned out I wasn't a week later, I'd stick to it until I flat out couldn't anymore, because it was just something I could call myself. Over the summer of 7th grade, it just so happened to be music, guitar specifically. I saw how people who played were just so happy to express themselves, and even my father, who could and barely still can play, had those same experiences. So one day, I asked him if I could play on his guitar. It wasn't incredibly interesting to me, nor was it something I felt super into. It was just something I did. Something that put a stop to my daily routine of coming home and lifelessly staring at the ceiling. Up until my sophomore year of high school, that was the set of parts I created for myself. After that shell shattered, I repressed the root causes and built up a new false sense of self almost immediately. A superficial mindset facilitated by a plastic heart. Reflecting back on it now, I don't know which actions were mine and which were the generic, store-bought parts. Well, everyone except Kohaku, who takes an active role in ensuring her sister gets over her issues. The Shiki housewarming party goes off without a hitch. Fun times were had, there was based underage drinking, and at the end of it, the first two to pass out were Akiha, who was confident that she was not drunk, and Hisui, who curled up on the couch like an adorable kitten. Kohaku, likely knowing that this would happen because she knows everything, immediately takes Akiha to her room. To ensure that she doesn't catch a cold, Shiki has to do the same to Hisui. He brings her up to his room due to hers being locked, and immediately crashes on the floor after putting Hisui on the bed. When he wakes up, he's right next to Hisui, who had apparently woken up and put him in the bed so that he wouldn't get sick. As a quick aside, I adore how this route emphasizes that they help each other. Again, complimentary, not supplementary. Awkward, we're in the same bed. Shenanigans aside, this is one of the biggest moments for Hisui. It establishes that #not all men are inherently bad. She'll still have her second thoughts in the moment, but due to Kohaku's meddling, she's closer to herself. Speaking of which, while she's not the sunspot she was 8 years prior, it's not like Hisui is a totally new person either. At Shiki's presence, she starts viewing things in a softer hue. Hisui is not a steel trap. She can be open to talking through things, it's just a matter of how the subject is broached. For instance, asking directly about the past doesn't net any results, but when stuff about Shiki comes up in a space disconnected from her mental framework of past bad, she isn't afraid of talking about it, and even does so wistfully. She's also willing to accept a lot of stuff, surprisingly, like Shiki sucking on her finger to seal up a cut, his general tomfoolery of sneaking out to do good by one of his classmates, and even simple things like accepting a ribbon that Shiki says she gave him, even though she's not the one who wears ribbons. If something she doesn't even recall gives Shiki hope, then she'll gladly accept it. Through her thin veneer of plastic servitude is a cute smile and sheltered emotions that are just waiting to be tapped into again. Hard cut to near the end of the route. Shiki is boarded up in his room. Meanwhile, Akiha and Kohaku have left to stop Tohno from tormenting said boarded up Shiki. From all sides, it seems like Hisui is about to lose not just her sister like 8 years back, but everyone important to her. Which, maybe thinking about the past is what gives her the inclination to go and knock on Shiki's door like she did back then. After all, if anyone could get him out of his room when he's terrified of everyone and everything outside of it, it's sweet, sweet Hisui. Of course, Shiki does open up, literally and figuratively. A detail I saved to mention until now is that though the CG exudes feelings of sadness, above all else, Hisui looks truly and utterly happy. She hasn't lost everyone, so she can still hope. Hisui has fully returned to the way she was before everything got so messed up. The raw fucking that follows reminds me of the Akiha route. All of Hisui's barriers have been broken down to the point where she's able to love someone on this level. That stuff's uplifting. The writing may actually be peak and just marred by translation, but from my English-speaking mind, absolute comedic genius. From a thematic standpoint, however, it just works. As with the slice-of-life stuff in Tsuki, it moves the plot along in a very natural way, i.e. synchronizers, and I feel like a lot would be missing without it.
Rip, tear, eviscerate. I will be free. Free to be truly human. For what could be more rational than living? What could be more ideal? A beautiful sister at my arm, and a penchant for murder are what anyone would want. It's only natural to want an ideal, blemish free life, and utterly beautiful. But someone's in the way. Who's in the way? Someone. Oh, I know some, but I don't know. Tohno Shiki. Tohno Shiki. There's only one of me. Anyone else doesn't exist. So, who's in the way? Who are you?
So lost in his own madness that he doesn't even recognize his own brother. Then again, it's not like Shiki recognized Shiki either, so yeah, Shiki is lost in his own madness in this route. Nothing he does makes sense, does it? It all seems all over the place. Though, let's rationalize it out from his point of view. Trapped in the basement for 8 years with no one but your cozy headmate named Roa to talk to. Forget about inversion impulses. That'd drive anyone fucking insane. In that regard, though I doubt anyone can actually condone his actions, we do begin to understand them. His very core shifted. Things that he normally would do became the opposite on that hot summer day. The figure of a bloody child, looking down at his mangled body was someone he can't even remember the face of, yet the very person he puts all the blame onto. After all, if it wasn't for this outsider, couldn't he have a cozy life with his sister at his arm? Couldn't he? He could. So killing Shiki should be his main priority. The same person who wouldn't get out of his head. So, yeah, that's who he needs to kill to get his life back. Akiha is Tohno's object of affection. He doesn't even see her as a person by the time the route ends. In his mind, if he has Akiha, then he has his life back. He can become the successor again and stop living in a cage, taking out his urges like a damned rabid animal on the one who comes downstairs. Urges that will never be sated. He hyperfixates on Akiha to the point where she becomes the only woman who sexually arouses him at a point. Now, I know I joke about incest a lot on this channel, but when Tohno reaches that point, as we see him doing both the Akiha and now this route, he's too far gone. What blood-sucking is to Sacchin, sister-fucking is to Tohno. Once he reaches that mind space, nothing else matters. Hence why he doesn't even recognize Shiki. He hates the idea of someone who came in and replaced his life, but there was never a face to that idea. It was always a delusion. Even when Shiki does come back to the mansion and sleeps in Tohno's room, he can't truly take that place. In his warped perception, Shiki is just some random guy who has no affiliation in the Tohno bloodline. Tohno doesn't hate Shiki. He hates himself. He was the arbiter of his own self-destruction. The line, "You're ugly," as spoken by Shiki to Tohno, while hilarious out of context, has such a visceral effect on Tohno because it's the truth. He is a blight. He ruined his own existence. He can blame outside forces all he wants, but he was the one who did this. Tohno can't run from his sin of both living a ravenous existence and killing the one person who kept him going because of his nature. He's disgusting, vile, and above all else, ugly. Shiki does recognize Tohno as his brother. It's because of that he has to scrub the stain of his pitiable existence. He sees a man who's gone off the deep end, who is unsure of the very breaths he takes. Now, as I think I've illustrated pretty clearly, this route is where Tohno reaches his peak insanity. Why is that? Simple, really. Shiki wouldn't get out of his head. His connection being strengthened to his dear brother meant despair for the pair. Shiki thought he was the killer for a time, and Tohno was constantly being watched, living under a surveillance state. You could be a saint, and having your every action watched would drive you up a wall. Tohno is far from a saint, already has a voice compelling him to act on every violent impulse in Roa, and his own Tohno blood has long since turned against his better wishes. Let's throw paranoia on top of all that. He was already insane, now he's barely functioning. He spends his last moments wandering left from right, only sure of one thing, that he is ugly. He killed Akiha, whom he loved, shifts the blame onto others, and when faced with death, something which he orgasmically dealt out to others, all he can do is cower. I can't feel bad for him considering his actions. That'd put me on the wrong side of delusion. But I look at him now, after all's said and done, and see what most in Tsukihime could turn out to be. Be it your true ancestor heritage, Roa taking you over, or just bad blood. He is a warped reflection of the majority of the cast. The shattering of that proverbial mirror, or what saves everyone from their fate, is the influence of other people. A cliche answer to be sure, but Tohno's been in the state Shiki was just days prior for 8 years. And I don't have to tell you, but no one was knocking on his door for him to come out. As a matter of fact, people have been actively pushing him back into his hole. But I'll save that for later in the video. For now, I think it's time to wrap up discussion of the Hisui route with Midday Moon, the true end. As with all things incredibly bittersweet, it should come as a surprise to absolutely no one that I adore this ending. While not my favorite in Tsukihime, the way it pays off everything seen in the route is excellent. Most notably of which is the revelation about Kohaku. She's been the one sabotaging what would have been an otherwise peaceful life at the mansion, all for one simple reason: revenge. Revenge that she's not even convinced of. It's not that she even wanted to see Akiha die and Shiki suffer, just that if she doesn't do that, what else is left for her? What would Kohaku have to live for if not to do what other people expect of her? She is a doll, an actor on the stage. She has to play her part in this play perfectly until the curtain drops. Of course, as any good actress does, she partakes in a bit of improv before she bows. She lets Shiki in on a little secret. That ribbon he had been carrying for around 8 years waiting to give back. If he would have given it to the right person, her, she was going to reverse course. This isn't her shifting the blame onto Shiki. This is Kohaku simply stating a fact. If Shiki had realized things sooner and gave her the ribbon, in turn giving her the hope back she gave him, she would have had something else to live for, something that wasn't the amalgamation of parts she laid out for herself. I find the parallels between Kohaku and Hisui fascinating as all hell. Hisui seems and presents as a French doll, but is chock full of genuine emotion, whereas Kohaku presents as cartoonishly happy, yet is just as lifeless as when she's first shown staring out the window. It's the classic bait and switch, and honestly, though I doubt anyone was actually shocked to find out the truth under that damned tree, the way it's told is what makes it compelling. All throughout the route from the very start, there are hints that the two of them have switched. Most notably, I don't know if you've noticed, but only one of them has a ribbon in their fashion catalog, both as a kid and as an adult. Beyond that, take for example Kohaku telling Shiki something along the lines of, "I can't believe Hisui doesn't remember that very hyper-specific promise that only the person you made it with would possibly remember. I mean, it happened under that tree over there, right? You were leaving the mansion, and that promise clearly meant a lot to both of you. Well, it was 8 years ago after all. I suppose forgetting who you made a promise with is natural." Stuff like this makes me scream at the screen, but with Shiki's own preconceived notions and neither of the girls being clear about it, you honestly can't even blame them for missing the hints. It's a situation where the reader can sit there suffering but love every second of it. More than the insanity stuff, Nasu dangling that line out for the reader, yanking it whenever they get close, is his writing at its best. It's what makes this route so much more compelling on a reread. When Kohaku, under the guise of Hisui, comes in and vents at him, begging him to remember the promise before fucking him, it shows confliction within her. She's desperately clinging to the hope that Shiki will do the right thing, and she's angry at him for not doing so, yet still does what's expected of her immediately afterwards. She can ache and moan, but being a tool is all she knows how to do, because it's easy, and it's all she has left if Shiki won't requite that hope. The eroge being divorced from the rest of the visual novel's funny prose in that it's genuinely uncomfortable as well as something I adore. This isn't an act of love like the other H scenes, nor is it as violent as the few rape scenes. This one just happens, and that works really well. Tsukihime was written with the mandate that it must contain sex, and as I've discussed in prior videos, some work far better than others. This one stands above most of the others because it's a clear indicator of Kohaku's mindset, and gets the audience wondering what in the world happened to make her that way when they reflect on the route. People talk about this image, the one with the tree, causing them to get misty-eyed. And while I am certainly in the same camp, the reasons for which the tree is so memorable is something I think's overlooked. Not only is this tree where everything about Kohaku is revealed and where she ultimately ends her life, this is the very tree which she gave the part she couldn't cut out a chance and had hope. This tree is where Kohaku's dream of cutting away her strings was born, and where it died. By the end of the Hisui route, the audience knows everything that happened in the Tohno household. We've seen how, for lack of a better term, fucked things have been since before Tsukihime started. Yet, there is nothing anyone could do to stop this chain of events once it had been set into motion. A notable distinction between the near and far side routes is that the far side is significantly less choice-oriented than their near side counterparts, which creates a sense of dread within the reader. They have no choice that could have prevented Shiki losing his mind, no choice to just give the ribbon to Kohaku. They have to watch as these characters slowly uncoil their inner machinations to unhinged levels. In the instance of Kohaku, it was too late. However, for Hisui, she doesn't lose face after her sister dies. She's the same smiling girl she always was, just grown up. The ending leaves off with her perspective. That ribbon she had been carrying around since Shiki gave it to her flies into the wind. And though she initially wants to go out and get it, she stops. It wouldn't be right to deny her sister that promise. The sheer bittersweetness of it all might elicit a response such as, "I wish Kohaku could just forget about all the bad stuff and be happy." The good ending, Dreams of Sunshine, lowercase, proves that such a reality would only be more hollow. Because Kohaku has forgotten everything, she's not Kohaku. She can never be Kohaku again. As I discussed earlier, in Tsukihime, having your memories stripped from you is a form of death, as it changes the person you are fundamentally. In that way, it's fitting that Kohaku takes on the Nanaya moniker. Shiki was in a similar spot when he had all of his memories forcefully repressed by Makihisa. Nanaya Shiki, though he comes out in spurts, dies at that moment, leaving behind a new boy named Tohno Shiki. Kohaku dies at this moment, leaving behind a new shell of a girl named Nanaya. Old reactions and personality traits might flare up here and there, but it'll never be the same. Like with Akiha's good end, it establishes that through a bitter pill, the true ending really is the only way in this route. In Midday Moon, the only remaining members of the mansion after all said and done are Hisui and Shiki, both not even members of the Tohno bloodline, funnily enough. But that's just proof that they're carrying their loved ones with them. The past can't be changed and they have to keep living. I find it inspiring that they still go on the vacation they had planned earlier in the route. In ways like that, they keep the memory alive instead of letting it fester and warp into a harmful personality trait. Hisui's initial response to finding out about what happened to her sister was to block out all actions that could lead to her becoming impure, which, as Kohaku demonstrated time and time again, wasn't really what she wanted. She just wanted Hisui to be happy. Midday Moon, unlike Dreams of Sunshine, sees Hisui smiling untarnished by bad memories, returning the ribbon to her sister and fulfilling the promise made under that tree. It's a satisfying ending by all means, but it does beg the question, did things really have to end this way? Is there no hope for things to be resolved without death? The Kohaku route provides an answer. You know, I never particularly realized how bad what had happened was until my brother acknowledged it with a question of why. Why? It sounded accusatory. I thought I had done something I should be ashamed of, something so bad he wouldn't even tell Mom. I was just a kid, I really didn't understand. He just kept on asking me why I did it. I didn't think I had done anything. Truthfully, I thought something was done to me. But that couldn't be the case if he kept asking why. If this was something I had done, then I had to take accountability. But that thought terrified me. I didn't understand what was happening at the time, just that it felt uncomfortable. I didn't like it. I hated it. And those flashbacks still assault me to this day. Back then, I really was just clueless. But for my brother, who was generally a cold person, to keep asking why, it must have been something horrible. I was scared that I could never take back what had happened. After all, the one person who knew what had happened came to me with such a threatening question. Looking back, I can't even blame him. My brother may be 5 years older than me, but he didn't know what else to say. He was just trying to help, but the way he went about it made me feel like I was the one who did something bad. I remember the day I broke. My brother just kept asking me that over and over again. But I was just a kid. I didn't understand what had happened, nor what I did that was so vile. Guilt and fear wrecked my brain. The mere idea of people finding out and asking me that, too, eventually led me to run to my mother's room, where I was inconsolable for the next day. I just cried until I fell asleep, then woke up and cried some more. It was a few days of feeling like that until I eventually decided that if these emotions were going to cause me nothing but pain, I'd be better off replacing them with plastic ones. Of course, I didn't word it like that. The mind rarely is so straightforward. Still, though, I remember it oddly vividly. I was jumping on the trampoline at my aunt's house by myself because I couldn't be around people at the time. I missed being able to talk to people without suffering anxiety attacks or running away. So as I jumped, I stared at everyone sitting on the back deck. If these emotions cause pain, then remove them. If that memory causes you anguish, then just forget it. Those were the only two thoughts running around my head, back and forth, zigzagging around my brain until they became law. I fell towards the springy surface with my eyes closed and bounced back up into the air, opening them again and smiling like it never even happened. The mind is a funny thing. A scary thing, honestly. Even if it's a life-altering event with enough thought, even that can be repressed. I worry if I've repressed anything else in my life. I doubt it could be nearly as serious, but if there's some other event that shaped me as a person that I just don't know about, then I want to know about it. But that's just the nature of repression. Until something comes along and reminds you of it, it'll stay locked up. What happened that day, the day of the assault, absolutely shaped me as a person. It led to years of me blindly clinging to escapism and cutting off any emotions I deemed as unnecessary. I wanted to act in an exact way that would give off the appearance of me being happy and completely normal to everyone else. The act of a doll or puppet. An act that was infinitely tiring, but was better than being pitied and asked the question of why over and over again. It was far easier than dealing with my lost innocence. So much simpler than facing the empty heart underlying the new falsified one. Well, it was easier, until the facade shattered and I recognized myself in the mirror. When that happened, I lived in fear. All the new friends I'd made would hate me for not being truthful. My family would ask me, "What's wrong with you?" in an accusing tone. I was only a plastic toy with a painted expression, so I couldn't have that. When that happened, I always forced down those negative emotions and started from scratch. Me, the doll, and me, the reality. I wanted to erase the latter. Everyone else hadn't honestly known me beyond the strings I put up to display an outward persona of jovialness and confidence. If I revealed my empty soul to the world, then what? If you cut the strings off of a puppet, all it's going to do is lie there. The Kohaku route immediately starts off on a different foot than its other Far Side counterpart. Things that might seem like retreads are actually entirely new scenes, the dynamics between those in the Tohno mansion isn't what's expected, and most of all, whereas Shiki was the one going insane last time, here it's the reader. I mean it. Never before have I yelled at my screen so much whilst reading something, both in frustration and in utter shambles. The Kohaku route has the benefit of the reader knowing everything before heading into it, so it has the bonus of being able to play with the reader's emotions like a finely tuned instrument. Take, for example, the scene in the courtyard. The reader knows to whom the ribbon actually belongs, and that Kohaku is at a point in the story where receiving it would change everything. But Shiki doesn't know what's what. He's the only one in the dark. It's an interesting section of the story because while we're seeing things from his perspective, through the sprite work and CG, it's Kohaku's head that we're really in during this scene. The reader can't fault Shiki for saying what he does. After all, most will have likely had the same misconception during the last route. It's understandable that he doesn't get it, despite and because of his efforts to return the ribbon being even stronger in this route. Which only twists the knife further when he puts it away, saying that he hopes Hisui remembers. I wanted to note Kohaku's expression here. It's something that hasn't been seen before in the visual novel, a sprite saved purely for this moment. It's a visual novel, a primitive one at that. Nothing is moving, the OST only has 10 tracks, and the sprite work, though excellent, is extremely limited. Despite that, with the text on screen and the use of this one sprite, you can feel the hope Kohaku has in her dying just a bit more. As she said in the last route, what hurt her more than anything is that due to Shiki, she couldn't force everything out. She looked down at him playing with Akiha and Hisui, at him looking her right in the eyes. If she was a doll, how could someone else acknowledge her existence? Dolls don't have lives, they simply are. Yet Shiki looked at her, wanted to help her on some level. She can disassociate and cut off thoughts as much as she wants, but it'll always hurt on some level because someone, even just through visual contact, confirmed her existence. Kohaku didn't particularly realize how bad what had happened was, until Shiki acknowledged it by asking why. Why does this have to happen to you? Why are you up there looking at me? Why can't you come down and play like the rest of us? Kohaku had to stay up there in the same four-walled room day in and day out, being sexually and physically abused by Makihisa. There was no answer to those questions for her, and though she cut off everything she could, those questions, those feelings, always remained. A doll can't have feelings, so she couldn't be one. She had to be human and thus had to feel. But those things cause her pain, so it'd be better to cut them out. But she couldn't. She scorned Shiki for looking at her, but these routes, like each and every person alive, are full of contradictions. It's not inaccurate to say that a single ribbon, a near worthless item to Shiki, is the most valuable thing in Tsukihime, more than the mansion, Shiki's knife, or all of Ciel's holy scriptures combined. The sentiments carried in that ribbon make it the center focus of this route. If Kohaku doesn't get it, she'll die a husk, or at least keep living in the shell that she's made for herself. A finely crafted exterior with just one crack. A break in the mold formed by Shiki's wandering eyes that's just big enough to reach out and grab that which she lent out 8 years prior. That simplistic white ribbon is so powerful, in fact, that when another romance interest pops up, Shiki doesn't even consider the possibility of entertaining it. Akiha's advances don't even register in his mind because Kohaku is his main focus. Wait a minute, is this a love triangle done right? Oh, Nasu, where was this level of excellence during the Ciel route? Still, good on you. Improvement, you're getting better. Speaking of callbacks, do you remember the Akiha route? You know, the first video in this series from way back when? Well, similar things happen here. Akiha's affection for Shiki actually seems to eclipse that of her own story, largely because of the influx of far more sensual scenes early on. Take, for instance, the drinking party, where she and Shiki have a damn good time. She gets in real close and gets all emotional, before then passing out due to the liquor. Stuff like that is spotted all throughout the route, and as these things tend to go, I'm actually a big fan of Akiha's characterization here. She's not the type to handle rejection well, especially from someone whom she's pined after for years, and who she feels just a breath away from having. Though maybe that's not the right way to put it. She doesn't even take the rejection at all. The moment Shiki is about to say something, she threatens to kill him. Like a 90s single by the Cardigans, she wants Shiki to pretend that he loves her, pining to be love-fooled. That's what she perceives as happiness, to be with the one she loves. I adore this subversion of Akiha's character. To my audience who has been here since part 1, remember back in the Akiha video where I said that her fixation with Shiki would see her going down the same path as Tohno? Well, that's happened now. She's reached her destination in this route. Like with Arc Wade in the near side, it feels good to see those warning signs being acted upon. Her Tohno blood inverts in such a way that I'd argue makes her far more formidable than her biological brother. She is manipulative, she gets into people's heads, and she actively wants to see them suffer. Tohno flies headlong into insanity because his inversion is so antithetical to who he used to be. Akiha, meanwhile, gives into it, and it only slightly twists her already present tendencies into something sick. It's like she has a voice inside her head telling her to give in to all of her base instincts. She kinda has a voice inside her head telling her to give in to all of her base instincts. Rewind it back a bit. Roa transferred into Shiki in the Ciel route because Arc Wade killed him, and now he's transferred into Akiha for the same reasons. Roa is like a virus, and none of the members of the cast are wearing a mask. They were bound to catch him eventually. Tohno arguably receives his best ending in this route though, put down by a member of the bloodline as was always intended. Though that's not to say it had no build-up, he has his best characterization in this route after all. The Night of Nanaya. You ever shared a coffee with a long-lost relative in the middle of the night talking about how fucked the world is? I think it's pretty relatable myself, but if not, it's a shame honestly. This scene, as I touched on briefly in my Kagetsu Toya 100% completion bonus video, is the most needed scene for this kimono-clad boy. It provides us a decent bit of characterization through the eyes of those who are inverted. Nanaya Shiki, awakened by Kohaku's medicine, and Tohno Shiki, awakened by inversion, have a talk. The crux of it is this. Society has general things it accepts and those it doesn't. If society is meant to cater to everyone, to human beings, where does the line get drawn at what's codified as human? After all, if those who follow their heart's desire, you know, the most human among us, aren't accepted, then society is the one who's inverted, not them. The argument of them being monsters and not human because they kill is brought up, but other people, like police, kill all the time. What makes it justified and what doesn't? Daily life is so full of contradictions that it's laughable. These two joke about how they must be the most sane because as they are, people who solely give in to their desires, they live a life of simplicity. No contradictions in sight. They ponder the nature of what that even means, their own messed up mental state, and in a sharp detour from routes prior, just talk like friends. What they talk about doesn't matter so much as the insight it gives us onto Tohno and Nanaya. Tohno is a guy who's snapped into little pieces. His views on society show a clear mental degradation, and his isolationist lifestyle has only pushed him further into his beliefs. It makes sense that if his worldview didn't extend beyond a cell where he could do whatever he pleased for years, that when he can't do that in the outside world without being called a monster, that he slanders it as the one that must be wrong. Nanaya, on the other hand, is someone who's recently been birthed back into the world. His killing prowess far reaches over Tohno's, but for now, he's essentially just here to learn from his older brother. When they're both given into their own blood, it's the only time they can freely talk to each other without a knife against someone's throat. If we flip the script and imagine what it would be like had they both been sane, we can see what their dynamic might have been as kids. I won't go into it here, but if you've read Kagetsu Toya, then you don't have to imagine it. An older brother can be arrogant and more eager to make a mark to show off to their younger one. But Tohno knows when he's beat due to more experience. He departs, saying that he'll leave this town if Nania is around. If they were to come to blows, then he'd undoubtedly lose. Showing that Tohno, though very much inverted at the moment, can actually be a calm and collected person. He rationalizes things out when he's afforded the opportunity, and it's just genuinely fun to hear speak when he's not screaming, "Shut up," like an insecure brat. I hope the remake adds more stuff like this because man does that boy need it. From here, Tohno walks right into the school, and then right to his death a day or so later, by the hands of the one he lusted after most. It's a beautiful bit of dramatic irony given the events of the Akiha and Hisui routes. On the bright side, Roa and the much more dreaded Shiki are no longer in his head, so I guess he got his wish. Not so much on the bright side. Instead, Roa is in Akiha, telling her to do all kinds of interesting things. I, like many others, love incest. However, the Kohaku route is hardly the time or place for it. We already had an entire branch of the story for that. I remember it very fondly. You wouldn't implement a love triangle and have it seriously be considered, sidelining the development of the main heroine, or even have an ending where said girl gets cucked out of a relationship unless it's just plain bad writing. Thankfully, the Kohaku route doesn't take that approach. It instead acknowledges Akiha as dead wrong. Honestly, I feel like this being the last route people usually read leads them to inadvertently hate Akiha. She certainly does some vile stuff in this route, though in this Sleepy's opinion, I find it a horrendous double standard to not detest Arcoade for doing the same, if not worse things, in the Ciel route. This development of Akiha being selfish and monstrous doesn't make her inherently evil. It makes her a wonderful antagonist, one the story needs because retreading Roa/Tohno again would straight up not be interesting. They've been explored to hell and back, while Akiha's dominating side has scant been touched. She's giving in to her desire, being forceful about it. If Makihisa had his way in raising her, this likely would be Akiha. But thanks to Kohaku, it's not that way. You'd think that if Kohaku was the main obstacle on her path of being sprayed with incestuous cummies, that the first thing Akiha would do would be to kill or subdue her, yet she refuses. Though having a synchronizer is nice, I'd argue the main reason for her actions is guilt and bond. These two talk to each other a fair amount, though Kohaku is a doll. Akiha feels a kinship and responsibility to her for what the Tohno family has done to make her that way. She may torture Kohaku, but she never actually kills her. No matter the choices you make or how it might seem, Akiha can't bring herself to do it. Now, does this make her actions excusable? No. That should be obvious to anyone who has a brain, you dummy. She's about as excusable as Arcoade or Ciel. Arcoade wants to drink Shiki's blood about as much as Akiha wants to fuck him, but the moment it's about incest, suddenly everyone gets all uppity. Jokes aside though, thankfully, there is some good to be found in the abuse that Akiha delivers in this route. How Kohaku deals with things. More specifically, how she copes. Putting yourself into the mindset of emptiness is a funny thing. It makes life easier as facing your own demons as a ship that never sets sail. Emotions are also a funny thing that go hand in hand with this. I talked a bit earlier about doll parts, how I put myself into multiple roles over the course of growing up. Well, let me tell you about what happened the last time they broke. I was coming out of high school, and over the summer that led to college, as cliche as it sounds, I watched Ava for the first time. That, like so many times before, made my falsified emotions drain out of my body as I was confronted with the reality that all I was doing was escaping. The world around me turned gray as I sat in the isolation of the same basement I'm writing this in now. I remember jotting down every little detail about myself, just trying to glean what I needed to fix. Ava had charged me with the crime of indulging in escapism and lies, and I had to serve my sentence. A sentence which I wanted to get over with as quickly as possible, but couldn't figure out how. Ava is a happy ending by all means, but I got so focused on how to reach that conclusion for myself that I was sent reeling. Point A was me, and I saw clearly where point C was. Point B, though? I didn't have a clue. I didn't feel much during that time save for frustration at myself for not having things figured out. I had tried so hard to emulate the actions of my brother, of my father and peers, but it always ended up the same way, with me lying on the floor staring up at the ceiling. No tears, no anger, just a pondering gaze. I asked myself why I was the way I was a lot back during those periods of identity fabrication, yet I could not answer myself. And now that I had recognized my actions as those of a fake, I couldn't just make a new personality to abide by. I had to be my own person, but I didn't even know who the fuck that was. I had thoughts of who I wanted to be, but every fabrication that came before began the same way. How was I to separate the truth from the lies? Cutting my emotions off and behaving like a doll in a playset, just acting out the whims of the one playing with it was easy to do. So trivial that I fell into it again and again. But I couldn't just repress it like before. I'd realized that the one moving the doll, the puppeteer controlling the strings, was me. I had finally acknowledged myself. A doll can't acknowledge themselves and others can't acknowledge the doll. My vampant isolation at home made that so simple to pull off for years. No one acknowledged me, but I had done the unthinkable and cut the strings myself. What the fuck had I done? I was terrified. I fell back on my hikikomori tendencies and gave them life for a year longer as I attempted to figure any of this out. Frustration. That's what eventually made me happy. I realized the anger I felt towards myself was indeed a real emotion, and that meant I was getting somewhere. Point B was coming into reach. I could maybe visualize it if I tried, map out the steps to get there. Jeez, I must have listed out an uncountable number of contradictory steps. Steps that I thought were perfectly reasonable, like socialize more, find something to be passionate about, and be healthier. General life advice nonsense like that. The problem was, my brain had been so hardwired to avoid anything near the realm of responsibility by that point, that I always came up with some convenient excuse. I was escaping again, and that drove me further down my own spiral of introspection. That process continued for what must have been months. I found myself getting into weird shit during that time, stuff I always had a passing interest in, but now it was a fixation. It was incest and lolly stuff, an interest I demonized within myself. I was worried that if this was the shit I was into, then who the hell was I? I couldn't help it though, I just found the stuff so captivating. It wasn't even that I was getting off to it was more like my heart was. Something about being cute and innocent, yet having sex and it not being a traumatic experience ticked a box somewhere within me I didn't know existed. But I hid that part of myself from anyone I knew. I thought I would be demonized and hated for it like I saw so many others go through online. I didn't want that, so I ran from it. I escaped instead of confronting it again. I fell down the spiral again. Let's talk about that spiral for a bit. It's my own invention actually, so I hope you all enjoy. The thought behind it is to visualize human thoughts and emotions as a swirl of sorts. At the center is negativity, self-doubt, and fear. Things that no one wants naturally, but is always slowly dragging you down if you take no action. For instance, while COVID was/is going on, those of you in isolation likely experienced a slow mental decline from the days of yore. As you sit home doing nothing, those negative emotions have time to seep into your conscious brain and overpower any positivity pulling you upward. The minute you take action, the spiral twists down harder, telling you not to do it. But you crawl up slowly, bit by bit, using a rope called positivity. Positivity you give yourself, like if I do X, then I'll be happier. The moment you contradict yourself or become inactive, though, you trip over yourself and fall back down the spiral, meaning that when you look back up, it seems even more impossible. It's easy to fall down, but so much harder to get back up. But the view up top makes it worth it. Now, every spiral has contributing factors, something that these negative forces can feed from. This naturally makes some more powerful than others, and for myself, the pull felt insurmountable. I didn't know why. As I said, I had repressed the memory. My first semester of college was spent repeating this process so much it physically made me sick. I'm an insomniatic fuck now, but I gladly accept this condition to the one I had back then. Being so afraid of confronting reality and not being able to construct a shell to put on for myself and others, all I did was sleep. All I did was run away. So I descended deeper into blank space. It was on one of these nights, waking up at 3 a.m., that I decided to go online and find some new media to escape into. I found a little title called Fate Stay Night. It was pretty alright. Then I read Hollow Ataraxia. It was also pretty cool, I guess. What I found next, though, was a little title called Tsukihime. My initial read order looked like this: Ciel/Archwade. I had thought I was on the Archwade route and got hardlocked, so I started over to read the Archwade route. Ciel, Akiha, Hisui, and then the route that opened my eyes to every little uncomfortable detail about my mental state, Kohaku. Kohaku copes via a simple method. She cuts ties with her earthly body and looks at herself objectively as a doll. It's seen when she cuts her finger and when Akiha assaults her for being too close to Shiki. She accepts the outcome as to be expected and moves on with life. It's terrifying to me, especially considering the sprite used in the prior example. This facial expression is a downright haunting. To avoid those painful things, she locks herself deep inside herself. She doesn't feel pain, nor does she feel happiness. But here's where that little crack in the facade I mentioned earlier comes into play. Shiki gets to know Kohaku really well over this route. It's due to this that, amazingly, before the ribbon's even given back, bits of humanity flare up in Kohaku. She holds true to her plan, same as in the Hisui route. Just like the Hisui route, she doesn't really want to do it. It's just something she's convinced herself to do, because if she doesn't, what will Kohaku do? In the last route, she achieved her goal, reached a net zero on life, and ended it. Here, she's a bit more conflicted. See, the more time she spends with Shiki, the more emotion she feels. Kohaku eventually stops dressing as Hisui when giving Shiki medicine. She doesn't want to deceive him. The first time she does this, Shiki thanks her for always looking out for him in his time of need. To which Kohaku looks guilty. Anguished, even. This is the same sprite that pops up in the courtyard when she doesn't get the ribbon back, so it can be taken as something exceedingly genuine. For a doll, that's pretty good. Any emotion is. Kohaku felt frustration toward Shiki in the Hisui route for not acknowledging the truth. At the same time, she never acknowledged herself. In her route, she realizes pretty quickly that she is not her pre-designated role. Shiki is by her side, constantly reminding her of that, thanking her, supporting her, and telling her that it's all right. Unlike, say, Akiha and Hisui, where those feelings might be out of pity, Shiki's are genuine. He doesn't know what happened. He's just doing this because he cares about Kohaku as a person, not as an object that had bad things forced onto it. Kohaku knows that, which is why she feels horrible about the way she's treating him, but until he gives her the ribbon back, she has to do that. It sounds silly to get caught up on something so small, but when someone views themselves as empty, something like a ribbon can be life or death. They cling on to dumb little things because of their sentimental value, because that object holds what little emotion and hope they could spare. When you have nothing, little things become meaningful like that. If she just outright tells Shiki the truth, then it's obligation for him to give it back, not something he wanted to do. He has to reach the end naturally, and she can't force his hand or the promise isn't particularly fulfilled. A promise like that, answered with obligation and not sincerity, doesn't mean a damn thing. Kohaku gives him all the hints in the world but can never actually tell Shiki outright because of that notion holding her back. So she waits, and she waits, and she waits. All the while, this little voice in her head starts to come into play, telling her to stop doing what she's doing, telling her to give it up and start over. That vortex pulls her down, saying start over from where, but that rope just keeps on pulling her up. Kohaku and Shiki start to share genuine moments together. One of my favorites involves Shiki and Kohaku in the detached building, talking about the past, the good and the bad. It's an optional scene, but I feel like this is the one time we get to see Kohaku past the facade. She isn't smiling dumbly, her expression in the CG is a more contented look. Though they are rudely interrupted, it sets the course for scenes to come. Scenes where Shiki starts to realize the truth before it's too late. Akiha may attempt to kill him and cut her connection to him if he doesn't comply with her wishes, but he refuses her vehemently. Knowing the truth, Shiki's only care in the world is giving the ribbon back. Speaking of which, let me tell you about the best scene in Tsukihime. It's as you probably expect, when Shiki gives Kohaku the ribbon back. It's hard to put into words how exactly it all makes me feel, and honestly, as I write this, and I'm sure as I say this, I feel my chest tightening up to a knot. As I'm sure any viewer of this channel knows, I cry a lot to media. This is partially because for the longest time I used it as an outlet for any emotions, but regardless of that, I cry. A lot. Those times prior, tears absolutely fell. But man, when Kohaku starts crying after getting the ribbon back and isn't even sure why she's crying, I was reduced to sobs. I couldn't speak for what felt like an hour afterwards because I was just trying to calm down. This happened on the first read, and it happened even more on this reread. It's silly, and I know it's not fucking real, but I just couldn't stop. I empathized with Kohaku at that moment more than I had any person I'd ever met in real life, or any character I had read about. Shiki acknowledged her existence, not the shell, just Kohaku. And no matter who that is on the inside, Shiki will love her all the same. After all, he's gotten to know, even if just a little here and there, that Kohaku is a good person. She gave him hope, and finally, he's giving it back. Kohaku doesn't know why she's crying, and when I first read this, I didn't know why I was crying so hard either. For Kohaku, it was those feelings she had repressed for years finally breaking out. She learned to cry for herself, to, in a small way, care about herself. For my own part, after doing the usual routine of asking myself why media affects me the way it does, it was a memory and feelings I had repressed for years coming to the surface. Finally, I knew why I was into what I was into. The next part will be sparse on details, but will still, frankly, be uncomfortable. For me, especially. When I see Kohaku, I see a ton of myself. Now, my experience with sexual assault was not even in the same ballpark, but needless to say, it fucked me in the head a bit. When I look at Kohaku in this route, it's all just a mirror of my own coping mechanisms. The fabricated personality to make others not worry and to lie to myself, cutting off all emotions and sensations because they're painful. Once I realized that and had been confronted with it, the remnants of whatever personality I had slapped on before shattered, and I was left empty. But I had an idea of what to fill that void with now. I understood why I was the way I was. That experience was the catalyst for forming the person I am now. When it's post-sex and Kohaku is talking to Shiki, saying that she's unsure of who she might turn out to be, it felt like someone scraping the sequestered chambers of my heart because that's how I felt. I wanted to be told that. So fucking desperately. It was awe-inspiring how well this scene and Kohaku were written. That someone like myself who had similar experiences could connect with her so deeply. To talk about the H scene, Shiki wanting to show Kohaku that sex can also be an act of love continued the trend of this hour in the VN absolutely breaking me. When reading Tsukihime, this is the only eroge scene I don't skip anything on. I read the entire thing anytime I go back to it. It's up there with the Lin H scene, something I'll probably get to at some point, as being one of the only good ones to read in all of visual noveldom. It sounds silly to say this, but just a genuine connection to someone you love, that is my fetish. Well, one of many, but still. I talked earlier about incest lolly hentai being something I got super into during this period of being lost to myself, and after reading the Kohaku route I realized why. I identify with the lolly character because I was young when it happened, and honestly, beat for beat, I just connect far more with female characters. I always have and probably always will. I like the incest partially because I've watched those shows for years, partially because the exploration of the taboo is usually interesting as hell, and partially because the love shared in those types of stories is actually wholesome in a weird way. For example, when reading those funny little doujins, it's a lot easier for me to rationalize what happened and project onto the lolly when it's not some rando creep, but someone who takes care of her and loves her. It's a microcosm of that whole protection thing. Now, for the record, I'm not exclusively into lolly shit. As long as there's some good romance or has some interesting concepts, specifically interesting concepts, I'm all there for it. Because love is a beautiful thing to me. Love is what Kohaku and Shiki have. The last day of the route is rather simple. The word of the day, ra. Tell me, kids, where do you see the ra? Is it Nanaya Shiki saunters out into the night? It certainly is. Also, something, Akiha turns back to normal and Roa doesn't particularly affect her because she's just that cool. Something, Hisui takes on the personality traits she used to have as a child, even showing us the same eyes Kohaku used in Hisui's clothing during the last route, showing that she's returning to herself again. Essentially, Akiha and Hisui both complete similar character arcs to their respective routes. In the battle between nature and nurture within Tsukihime, the answer isn't one or the other, it's both. Hisui is more thoughtful of other situations but doesn't degrade herself anymore, instead choosing to call Shiki out on his bullshit in the ending and be the older sister type she once was. Akiha, by comparison, rejects the nature of her Tohno blood / Roa via being nurtured back to sanity by Shiki and Kohaku. When her Nissan can't kill her in the ending, it has a profound effect on Akiha, and makes her realize what she was actually doing. She returns to her nature of being strong-willed, but in a healthy sense that still cares for the people around her instead of using them as tools. I just adore her loudly complaining that she wants a man like Shiki. Not Shiki, but someone as good as him. It's funny, and it shows some genuinely nice character growth from her yandere tendencies of yore. It feels to me like I'm always building to some kind of major point in these videos, that I need to make some kind of grand statement about the work I'm analyzing once I reach this pivotal juncture we call the end of the video. However, actually putting that into words always feels so elusive to me. It feels wrong just to say love changed Kohaku, but conversely, that's the only idea that pops out in my head. She abandons her only goal for a life of uncertainty. That uncertainty is certainly her own, however. Her accepting that and saying that she's unsure of who she might turn out to be is magical to me. Kohaku accepts things as is, and as I keep harkening back to over and over again in these videos, she skipped point B. She will be herself as is, whatever that might be. In the structure of nature and nurture, Kohaku will simply have to nurture her own nature, draw it out of herself through experiences she'll have on her own. The world outside of the walls she surrounded herself with seemed to her insurmountable. But those are just the walls of the mansion she could never get out of. Beyond that is a world of opportunity that could be hers if she just goes out and takes it. It doesn't matter if Kohaku is nothing right now. If that's the case, she just has to make an honest effort towards finding out what it is she is. No lies, no walls. Just Kohaku. As someone going through something so similar, the parallels left my throat sore from sobs. Needless to say, I got quite a bit out of that ending. Soon after reading Tsukihime the first time, I tried all sorts of things that I thought might be me. I took an earnest effort at my classes and found myself just adoring this German literature class I was taking at the time. The final for that class saw me analyzing the main character of this book called The Sorrows of Young Werther. Good book. Man was the original simp. But that's neither here nor there. When I was in class writing that final, I stayed 20 minutes later than everyone else. The professor had to tell me to wrap it up and get out because he had a class in 5. It felt good to write like that. And soon thereafter, I started writing my own drafts for stories, characters, and that dumb Cherry Blossoms Dream video, which is still awful in my eyes, but it's a video that got me to where I am today. After that, I eventually escaped my neat ways and became a much happier and actualized person. I found my field of flowers to stand amongst and be in love with. I learned how I ticked, I learned what it was I loved, and I stopped living in a four-walled world. I'm still a weak person. I board myself up in my room and spend days coping and just rationalizing things out. I catch myself falling into old tendencies, and I fear that one day I'm going to wake up and feel just as empty as I did back then. But that's all irrational. Bad days, weeks even, pop up. However, the tools to get through them are all there, and they always have been. Also, there's nothing wrong with taking the time to think things over. We all have the ability not to move on completely, but to live with the demons and become better, happier people for it. Kohaku is emblematic of that. This is one of the hardest yet easiest videos I've ever written. It's all just poured out of me since I opened up the document a few days ago, and though it will likely take me more than a month to edit, this is easily the thing I'm most proud of. More than the Ilia analysis, more than the earlier Tsukihime videos. This video is the one I can look towards and call an unbridled passion project. I always stifled personal stuff in my prior videos. For example, I cut 5 pages out of my Ilia UBW that explained why it impacted me like it did. Spoiler alert, daddy issues. With this video, I've realized I can't do that practice anymore without going creatively bankrupt. Analyzing why media affects me the way it does is something I've done all my life, and I was annexing that part of my writing for fear of alienating people. As those videos came out and I gained new friends that were actually people I could talk to, I slowly realized that it was okay to talk about these things. I know this sounds silly, but thank you to everyone who was here through the past year. I don't think I'd be here without both these videos and all of you, who gave me inspiration to push on even when they weren't the best or I was really going through it. The Maid routes, and by extension this, the Maid video, have meant a lot to me. Though I'm writing this post-takedown of the original upload 6 months later, that fact has only become more and more evident. I'll leave it at this, and sorry if this is repeating points. Thank you all. Here's to the future, and let's wrap this up. I am aware that Tsukihime is by no means the most technologically advanced or even the best from a writing standpoint. As I've pointed out in these videos, it's clearly got many flaws. But what I find captivating is how it draws people in, how each and every person I've seen play it takes something different away from it. Rather it be a lifelong love for Kohaku that's strong enough to make you buy an unreasonable amount of plushies, an adoration for Sacchin that borders on the realm of, I'm concerned this isn't a joke anymore, or just being enraptured with how Nasu conveys the inversion impulses. It's a visual novel that essentially catapulted the medium into new heights. At the time it was released, though it may not seem like it in the West, Tsukihime was an absolute phenomena. As such, even with the remake out now, I feel that the original still deserves a read. As jank as it is, and for all its faults, it's simply a masterwork. And though I'm open to anything else coming along and taking that top 1 spot in my mind, Tsubihime might have if I get over my bias, but that's not important, it's gonna be a hard one to top. Unless the remake has the Satsuki route, then it's a shoo-in. Addendum. I'm gonna fucking cry. When I come back to the Sukiverse on this channel, it'll be with the Plus disc and then Kagetsu Toya. But not now. I have other projects I'd like to finish in the meantime, like Kara no Kyokai for instance, before this brain rot goes any further. One last thing. This video took weeks to make, and the process has literally given me nightmares. So if you enjoyed it, please do share it around and leave a like, make a comment even. Also, I have a Patreon. The Tsukihime Analysis, the biggest undertaking thus far on the channel, is now complete. Again. So I definitely want to hear those thoughts. In the meantime, however, let us depart. For now that I've laid my entire self bare, all that's left to do is stare at that blue glass moon under the crimson air. Tsukihime.